Tell me first of all, just so we've got the background, your family. Your father was basically Punjabi, is that right?
Punjabi. And the family started in Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama is now. That's where my grandfather was. And he spent 7 years in England.
Doing what?
He was at Faraday House, electrical engineering. And he had a cousin, an Indian cousin of his, who was also in London at the same time. And I believe they had a really wonderful time. And then he came back once for his sister's wedding. I think his father insisted he should come back. And he told me that wedding took 3 weeks. Can you imagine a wedding? So anyway, he came and then he went back to England. And then when he came back, my grandfather was in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And
working for the Maharaja?
Well, for the government there. My grandfather was a Home Minister as well as a Chief Justice of the High Court. He
was a Home Minister?
Mm-hmm.
In the Maharaja's government?
Well, in the government, the Kashmiri government.
What was his name?
Sukhdial Pasricha. His name was Sukhdial Pasricha, and but he died about, I think I'm maybe the only one who ever sat on his knee, because he died then and everyone said he'd been poisoned, because he was very friendly with the royal family. But anyway.
And what was your father's profession?
My father was an electrical engineer, a chief electrical engineer, trained at Faraday House in England. And
what was the family like? You mentioned that English was the language of the household.
Well, mostly because, everybody... Kashmir there was a resident there, English resident, in all these different places. The British had residents. And there was a resident who knew my father very well, and it was a great thing that you had to. My father said we had to, if we were going to speak English, we had to speak it correctly. He didn't want all this. When we went off to school in Murray at the convent, you picked up that awful Anglo-Indian accent, which, they say my, oh my, and all sorts of things. My father and mother were absolutely horrified, mainly my father. We were not to speak like that, and so 3 months at home from school, we went back to what we were supposed to be. Then you went to the convent for 9 months, and back you went into that awful.
But did you learn Punjabi or Urdu or Kashmiri?
No, we had smatterings of it, but we didn't really. It was English that was the main emphasis. You had to know English. In those days, the British were there. We had a British resident. And the emphasis on really speaking English correctly.
And how did your father meet your mother? Was that in London?
Must have been, I don't know. We never sort of heard we never, we were not encouraged as children to ask all these questions. Children kept their place and the adults kept theirs. It was run that way. Very much on the British sort of upper class lines.
But where did your mother come from?
From England.
But whereabouts in England?
I don't know. I've never known. I don't know anything about... We were not encouraged to ask any questions.
Do you know her maiden name?
I'll have to ask my sister, she would know. My sister has more of certain things of the family, she knows more. But I really don't. I never really... My aim was that I wanted to go to England. And I wanted to have some sort of training and I could stay in England. And so anyway. But anyway, don't go on.
But how did you married a Sikh gentleman, is that right?
Well, he was basically a Sikh, but he didn't have hair and beard. He was in England. He was a wonderful, very intelligent man. he took the bar exams, he'd had his BA, B.Lit, MA, Lit and everything. And he approached my parents, my father, I think. He used to meet of course, the women didn't mix. It was the men who mixed at the club. So he must have spoken to my father. And the next thing was, I was told there was a person in the garden who wanted to talk to me. And, you know, we were brought up very sort of, we were sort of kept away. We weren't allowed to go out and mix and so on. I'm looking for a special word, but I haven't got it.
Purdah?
Hmm?
You weren't kept in Purdah, were you?
Oh, no, we weren't. We're not Muslims. We're Hindus. And anyway.
So you got married. Was that a religious wedding?
Well, yes, it was, but it was not a very long, drawn-out thing, because my first husband had also been in England for many years. He was a barrister, he was MA, B.Lit, this, that. He was a very, very intelligent man. And I was told there was someone in the garden who wanted to talk to me. And here I went out, creeping out there. Afterwards I thought about it. I thought I could kill my parents for doing this to me. But anyway.
And how old were you?
I must have been 18 or 19 or something. I can't remember. You know, I don't know what it is, but I think I've put all those things out of my mind as if they happened to someone else.
But a very anglicised, westernised young woman marrying somebody who was basically a stranger, that must have been quite difficult.
Well, it was, but you see, that was our custom. It was the custom.
Well, not your mother's custom.
No, but then the men were the predominant. My father, who, you know, everything my mother did, because actually she wanted to do everything the way my father wanted it done. And so that's what happened, and I was always furious about it. Even to this day, when I think about it, I'm mad about it. And so I don't even talk about it to my son or anything. I don't talk about it. I really don't want to.
But you were married in Baramulla?
No, I don't even remember where I was married. Not in Baramulla, I think it was in Lalpur, in the Punjab.
But your first husband died in the 1940s?
He died the year that Amrita was born. Now she's 43, I don't know. I know that I had to leave because my sister was staying with me. She came to be confined at the convent, and so she was with me when I had the news that he had died down in Lalpur, in his village, you know, where he had all his property. They grew a lot of oranges and, you know, sugar cane and the usual things. So I had to go from there, go down. I hated it. I had an awful time. And I was told that he'd been poisoned, but who knows? And I think I was almost poisoned because the night that I was to leave, you know, they put me into a tonga and sent me 3 miles on my own with a tongawala, driving me around all these awful lanes and so on. I was absolutely terrified. Once I got on the train, I thought, oh, thank God, I'm on my way home. But then I started thinking they might send someone to kill me on the train.
So how did you meet John?
Well, I had been away from Kashmir. I don't know what's happening with that light. And I came back. I used to go and stay with my sister in Jamshedpur. And then I came back, and Mrs. O'Kelly wrote and asked me to go and have tea and play badminton. And I knew that I think one of my brothers was on leave from the army, 2 of them, I can't remember. But anyway, I went. And John was standing at the gate. And in those days, we had to be very careful because our parents didn't want us to, know people or mix with people, or really you weren't supposed to have anything to do with men. I remember once somebody sent me some magazines and my father was furious, wanted to know where I'd met this person. I said, I don't know, never did. I don't know how they've come to me. But that's the way we were brought up, very strictly.
But you were then a widow with a son when you met John.
Oh, yes, yeah, when I met John. I was thinking about it the first time. When I met John, but then my son was in the Doon School, and I made arrangements for him for his travelling back to Kashmir for his holidays, and that's how he happened to be there when the trouble started, in 1947.
But how were you engaged to John by then?
No, I refused to marry him. I didn't want to get married again. I was not married to him.
Because he describes you in some of the records as as his fiancée.
I know. When he told Lord Louis Mountbatten that his fiancée was in Kashmir and he had to rescue her. That's what he told me when he went to see these people. He went to see General Boucher, Lady Kit Kat, and I forget the other man's name. There was one from the Air Force. He was the head of the Air Force, I think. Then there was General Boucher and there was Lady Kit Kat. And John had met them, and then when he was given this plane by Lord Louis Mountbatten to bring me back to Delhi, he told me that they wanted me to go over and they wanted to meet me. And I had I just had one sari with me. I didn't have really, I don't even know if I had a handkerchief. That was the way I left Baramulla to go to Srinagar.
But what was John doing in Kashmir? What was his job?
He was he was in the army, during the war. And Sir William Roberts approached the army and said that he needed someone because he had all these, whatever you call it, I forget the name of it now, but forests, and he was able to have the trees cut down, and they were machan down the Jhelum River.
Oh, down towards Pakistan?
Or down to the plains anyway, to Lahore, and to Jhelum. They were sent to Jhelum, really. And
so your husband worked for him?
So then he was seconded from the army, because that's what Sir William Roberts had asked for. And that's how he came to Kashmir, and that's how he was looking after things for Sir William Roberts, who couldn't be in Kashmir all the time, or very seldom. And he lived with the O'Kellys.
And what was his background? Where did he come from?
Who?
Your husband, John?
From Scotland, from a place called Beelside in Aberdeen. That's where he came from. And he was not generations of Scots. He came straight out in the army to train parachutists.
What sort of man was he?
What sort of man?
What did he look like when you first met him?
Well, I'll show you a photograph of him, but he didn't change very much. He was not very tall. He loved going out to parties, and he was a real party man, and he liked his scotch, but not too much. And he loved good food, really good food. He always loved the way I decorated my homes. Everything was left to me, and I used to give big dinner parties and, curry parties and so on, and he was always very proud of that, and always wanted me to go out in a sari. Whenever we were invited out, he'd always ask me if I was going to wear a sari, and I'd say, oh, no, I'm not today. Yes, please do. And I noticed that Jim did that with my niece the other day when we were going out to Paula. Jim's a nice person.
I imagine you were a very beautiful and elegant young woman.
Well, they said so, and that's where there was trouble with my first husband. When we were in Hyderabad, we joined the club, and it was full of British.
Hyderabad Deccan or Hyderabad Sindh?
Hyderabad Sindh. And we joined the club. And we went there every evening, And all the British officers were very kind to me because my husband had a drinking problem. And he'd drink and then he'd stand there swaying around. And they would be very nice and come to me and say, Leela, we think you ought to take him home and we will help you. So they did. They used to help me. And then he'd accuse me, of course, of, oh, they just like you because you're so beautiful and this, that and the other. And well, anyway, that was another story.
In 1947, when did you leave Baramulla prior to the raiders coming? What was the story there?
Well, I left because I wanted to get my sister away. She was staying with me.
In Baramulla?
She had, that's where I lived at that time.
Whereabouts in Baramulla?
Well, it's very difficult to describe, but it was not anywhere near where the shops and things, the bazaars or anything. It was a different area. There were fruit gardens all over, and I had quite a lot of gardens with fruit. And I had just planted 500 or 600 trees, small trees, apple trees, when all this came up. When I went back with Tamara, they had put tents up everywhere in my orchards. And
the Indian Army?
Yeah.
But so you left when we're talking about a day or two before the raiders came, or a week or two, or how long before?
No, I left about there were rumours that something was going to happen. And I thought, oh my God, I'd never be able to face her husband if anything happened to these children. Because she was with me, with the children. But how was I, if anything happened to them, I thought to myself, how will I face her husband, Juggan, whom Amrita's father. So I thought, well, I better go. So I managed to get into a bus. I had my servants out, and I said, you get me a seat, on a bus. And I went I went to Nido's, I picked a room, I got a room, and then I called this man, and I've been trying to think of his name, but he was the head of the whole transportation thing.
A British man or a
No.
Kashmiri?
No, he was a Sikh gentleman, but from a very well-known family, known to my family. So I went to see him. And I forget his name now. I was trying to think of it the other day, and I said, you have to help me. You have to get my sister and her two children and my son out of here, because everyone was fleeing. And he said, Leela, but there's no room. All the aircraft are full. I said, you have to do something. And I went back, and I almost cried there, and I said, please, I have to get her out. Well, I went back again every day to see him, and in the end he said, Leela, I'm going to send them out on the last plane that's going out from here.
But they were then in Baramulla still.
Yeah, I know, but I had to get them back from there. So I had to call my sister and say, get a tonga, get any blessed thing you can, but come.
And when was that, do you think? Which day?
Well, it was before these people started coming up towards Uri, or whenever, they hadn't even, I don't think, arrived in Dumail at that time, or maybe that was their starting point, and we heard the rumours, and I knew I had to get her out with her children. And then, of course, my son. So that was when I made all those arrangements, and he did get them out.
But tell me about the mood in Srinagar at that time. Do you remember people being worried about the raiders, or was life as normal?
Well, it was not normal. Everyone was going around, rather fearful. But I don't think they quite realized the impact of what was going to happen. And none of us realized how close these people were to the airport. They were 5 miles from the airport. And then my friends, I was at Nida's hotel, and of course everyone knew me there.
But how did they know you? Did you stay there often?
Oh, of course, my parents had been going there from when we were children.
It was a posh hotel.
Oh, but my parents went there. They gave parties there. They used to come from Lahore, and stay there.
Your parents lived in Mahura?
Yeah.
But did you live in Mahura?
Yeah, as a child, because that's where my father started. He was in charge of that whole electrical powerhouse and everything.
So you moved to Baramulla when you got married?
No, my father moved to Baramulla eventually from Mahora, and then he was in Srinagar for a while, then back in Baramulla. We had a nice house in Baramulla, and that's where we were, and this is where my first husband's people, because his father was the settlement commissioner. So, I've put that all out of my mind now. It never happened to me.
But tell me about Nedus. What was Nedus like at that time?
Wonderful. We used to have dances there. There was an English gentleman who had a band. He was the conductor. Actually, well, all right, that's...
No, what were you going to say?
I was going to tell you that he wanted to marry me.
Did he ask you?
Of course he did.
And was this before you were married first time or after you were widowed?
No, after, when I was a widow.
Were you tempted?
No, I didn't. He was all right, but he was not the type of person. I didn't think he was very cultured, but he was quite a nice man. And quite a few of my friends, Begum this and that one, I can't remember their names, they couldn't understand why I didn't want to have anything to do with him. And I said, but I don't want to marry him. And so why should I encourage him? But he tried, he did try, but anyway, I just wouldn't, do anything about it. I didn't want to. He was all right, but I didn't really, he was not the type of person that I was interested in. So...
Did you ever see the Maharaja?
I personally didn't, but my father used to go there to cook with him. There were cooking classes. He used to have cooking sessions, not classes, sessions. Once a week or once 2 weeks, I don't remember. And my father, of course my grandfather, knew them very well. But then my grandfather died, and then my father, when we were in Srinagar, he used to go there quite often, but he never attempted to mix that with his family.
What did your father think of the Maharaja?
Well, he didn't really know him. He didn't mix with him socially except for these cooking sessions they had. Because I think that Maharaja had sort of a special kind of group of people he mixed with. And I don't know, I don't think my father and his friends ever, whoever the friends were, I can't even remember now. But you see, in my day and with my parents, we were in one place. We were told by our parents when people come to see us to call, and we are not there, you please sit there and talk to them until we come, and then please leave the room. And so we'd all creep out and go, because we were never allowed to be with adults. Children had their place and adults had theirs.
But Nedus Hotel in the 40s, I have heard quite a few stories of British soldiers who went up there for holidays and stayed at Nedus or on the houseboats and had quite a jolly time. Lots of girlfriends, lots of whiskey.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. It used to be that it was hot in the plains in the summer, and all these army officers used to send their wives up to Kashmir, where the wives had a whale of a time, really did.
Oh, boyfriends as well?
Oh, sure. The Maharaja of Kuch Bihar, whom I knew, and his brother. We were all in a group. We used to have a whale of a time. And his sister, Aisha. I used to go over to the Kuch Bihars and play badminton. But anyway.
And did you swim?
I've never been able to swim, never been taught. I was talking about that, I don't know who it was, my son or Amrita, or whoever it was. And Paula, I became friendly with Paula because, she spent her life before her divorce in New York. So she's a little more sophisticated than the people here. So She and I go out sometimes to find fish and chips, or we go to a movie together, and now and again. And I like Paula. She's warm-hearted and kind. And I had no friends. I came here without knowing a soul, except for my son and his wife, and a realtor here, whom I met through them. I didn't know a soul here. And I must admit I was rather fearful. I didn't know what all this was about. I didn't know how I was going to cope with it. Being one Indian amongst a whole lot of Americans.
Do you feel yourself to be Indian?
Oh, I am. I've always been very proud of being an Indian.
Do you regard yourself as Indian rather than Kashmiri?
Oh, I never would wish to be a Kashmiri. I never had any sort of desire. I've always been an Indian. I've been proud of it. And then, because of this nonsense about my passport, John saw to it that I became a British national in 1 week. But that was not something that I wanted to change. I didn't want to change. But when it came to it, then I had to.
But tell me a little bit more about Srinagar in the time before 47, before the trouble. A lot of Europeans aren't there.
Yes, because that was a resort to come to in the summer. It was cool. It was hot in the plains. It was cool in Kashmir. And there they came, and they had a whale of a time. There were dances and parties and, all sorts of things going on. Rushing up to Gulmarg.
To do what?
Oh, to go there to dance in the at Nido's there.
Nido's had a place in Gulmarg as well?
Oh, yeah, they did.
I get the impression that these are sort of happy memories.
Well, it was, yes, those were nice times. And we had a wonderful time. And, we went all over and we did lots of foolish things, I suppose. But...
Give me a flavour of them. What sort of foolish things?
Well, I suppose we did. I can't really remember them, but we did. And we sort of danced and rushed around here and there, the usual things that youngsters do. And
this was when you were widowed? Or this was when you were... before you were married?
No, this was when I was widowed. I wouldn't have been allowed before then. But then I was on my own. And I went to Srinagar and took a cottage from the Guptas. I rented it, and then there I stayed, because I asked you about Paul Gupta. His mother was a friend of mine. They were friends of my parents. But then Vera and she was an English woman. They had the big house, and then they had a cottage. So I rented the cottage, and that's where I stayed. So we used to go out, and there was a Dr. Sony who was a dentist, and he had a Scottish wife, Foy Sony. So we were all in a sort of group. It was nice.
So when your sister and her children and Inda arrived on the Tonga from Srinagar, from Baramulla, they came to Nedu's?
Yes, I had a room ready for them with a huge fire going. And that's where we stayed until I had the call that they were leaving, or the plane was. So they left.
But not you?
No, not me. I had no intention. My parents were prisoners in Baramulla. How could I go? I had to try and do what I could for them. And so I stayed there, and then my friends, the Guptas, he was the chief of the PWA, what was it?
Public Works Administration?
Yes, he was the chief. He and his wife, who was English, the Sonys, he was a dentist and she was Scottish, and a whole group of us. They came one day to Nido's and said, Leela, we're all at Foy's place. We're staying. They had a huge house, beautiful house. And you have to come and join us. You're not going to stay here alone at Nido's. So bag and baggage, they took me off to go, It's not Gupkar Road, but it's another road. I forget the name of it that goes down. And they had a lovely house, and I suppose that house is still there. So that's where I went, and that's where I was when the plans were made to leave, because we had to. They said we had to get out because these people were within 5 miles of the airport.
So do you know what day that was?
No, I didn't make any, I didn't see what the point was. I know that it was, it must have been, I don't know. These people had already come and they were 5 miles from the airport, so they'd already been through Baramulla and they were wending their way up to Srinagar.
So how did you get out?
So then and then of course the Indian troops were coming in because he'd by then decided, the Maharaja, to join in there and ask India to sort of rescue us. But I went out then because we were told we had to leave. I was at Foystonis with all my friends, and they came and said, we have to get ready, so get all your things together, whatever you have. So we left in a car to begin with. And somebody had a dog, I think, and somebody had something, but we had our fur coats. And I would love to, I wish I'd had pictures of that. It makes me laugh now when I think of it, but it was a terrible, terrible time. So we left in a car. Well, that broke down. Then we managed to get hold of a bus, and we all piled into the bus. And then that broke down. And we're wending our way towards the Boothbay Harbour this time, where we met the Indian troops coming in. Thrilled to bits, we got up and cheered and so on. They were going to get these people out of Kashmir. And so then we went, that was the bus. Then we went into some other vehicle. And eventually we landed up in a jeep, an army jeep, through Paul's father. And there I sat with Vera Gupta on this side of me, with a gun on her shoulder, me on this side with a gun on my shoulder, a dog under my legs somewhere on the floor, and Mr. Gupta was there, and I forget who else was with us. And the PWD people along the way were trying to help us to get into Jammu, where we eventually arrived. And then we stayed in the PW the place, the house, because there's a house there for the chief. So we all had our rooms, and one morning, Winnie Shaw, she was another one who was with us. She did some work. She was from somewhere in India. She came to me and she said, Leela, you'll never know who is here. And I said, well, how do you expect me to know who is here? I don't know what you're talking about. So she said, well, I would like you to know that John Thompson's at the airport and he's coming over to fetch you.
Which airport is this? Jammu?
Yeah. And she said he's coming over, he'll be here within half an hour, and he wants to take you to Delhi. And I thought, well, I don't know what she's talking about. How could he possibly be here? I thought he was a prisoner, in Baramulla or somewhere. I knew he'd bicycled down there or gone, whatever he'd done, but I had heard he was a prisoner in the convent. So he arrived in half an hour. And he said, get your things together. And I said, well, I have no things to get together. I left without anything except I have one sari and one or two things in a small suitcase. That's all I have. But anyway, off we went to Delhi.
By road?
No. He had Lord Louis Mountbatten's aeroplane. So we went, he and I were the only passengers.
From Jammu?
Yeah, and we went to Delhi. And then I was told by John that General Boucher, Lady Kit Kat, and the other general, I forgot what his name is. I've been trying to remember it. He was Air Force, I think, and General Boucher was Army, as far as I remember.
Well, it was General Lockhart was one of the three.
There was one other.
And there was
the Air
Field
Force.
Marshal Auchinleck.
No, not he. It was not he. There was another one, but I cannot remember his name. They were very nice to me, but anyway, John told me they wanted to see me, and I thought, my God, how am I going there? I have no clothes, my shoes are awful. I look like a refugee and I'm going to see these people. But he said, they want to see you and you have to. So I went. They were most kind. First of all, they gave me a big box of cosmetics they'd collected for me. And we sat and we talked and drinks, and they were very, very kind to me. But all the time I felt so awkward being there. I felt like, I needed put into a good bath and scrubbed and get some decent clothes on. And
so this was all as soon as you arrived in Delhi almost?
Oh, yeah. And the next day or that day. I can't remember that. I've sort of pushed all those. It's too long ago for me to. It was too painful for me to go through all that. But anyway, I do remember going to see them, and they were very kind.
And you saw Mountbatten?
No, I didn't see him. He was not there that day. But General Boucher was, Lady Kit Kat was, and there was some other man. He was Air Force, I think. I can't remember his name. But we spent, at least an hour with them or more, and we had drinks with them, and they gave me this box of cosmetics, and then the next thing John arranged was that he and I would get onto a plane, fly to Rawalpindi and rescue my parents, whom he believed by that time, having spoken to General Gracie and all these other people, that he thought they must have been rescued and brought down to Lahore or Fendi or wherever. So it was arranged that John and I would go by plane and go and bring my parents and take them down to Calcutta and then probably to my sister for a while until we rehabilitated them. Because my mother was not well. She'd been shot twice. And my father was a nervous wreck, I think.
So you flew to Rawalpindi?
Well, the first thing, we got onto the plane, and then something happened. We went into a kind of, the plane, in trying to taxi off down the runway, went into a kind of ditch or something. So we had to get out of that and then start all over again. But eventually, we didn't go. We had to wait. My parents were brought into Delhi. And from Delhi, we arranged for them to go to Calcutta. And that is where I met up with them in Calcutta.
And when did you meet up again with Inda?
When I went to my sister.
In
Jamshedpur.
He'd gone to Jamshedpur?
Well, yes, he went with my sister and the children when they flew out of Kashmir. So he was there. I didn't think I was ever going to see him again, so I wrote my sister a letter and asked, well, that was when I was still in Nidos. I went to the bar and looked around, and I didn't, had never been in a bar on my own, but I went in, looked around, and I saw two Scotsmen, particularly one who had all his kilt and everything, looked absolutely wonderful. And I went to him and I said, would you do me a great favor, please? Are you leaving Kashmir soon? And he said, yes, the next day. And I said, well, if you could do me a great favor, would you mail a letter for me? And he said, certainly. So I asked if he was going to be in the bar for a while, and I would rush back to my room and, write this letter to my sister. And then I came back to the bar and gave it to him. And he was so gracious and so kind. I'll never forget that man. And he took the letter, and that was it. He said, don't worry, I'll mail it. Didn't say another word, and I left, went back to my room. But I asked her in that letter to look after my son, because I said I didn't know whether I was going to get out from Srinagar or not. There was no, one didn't even know. It was all problematic. And that's how Inda went to Jamshedpur. And that's where I met him again.
Now tell me about John's mission back to Baramulla. How did that happen?
Well, he was...
During the Trouble?
Yeah, well, I don't know whether he was in Srinagar or he went to... I think he must have gone there to see what he could do about whatever was happening, or find out what was happening. And when I was at Nidos, I went into the dining room. And who should be sitting there but John, whom I had been trying to avoid because he was very persistent. He wanted me to marry him. He'd been offered a job in New Zealand. And I said, well, are you thinking of taking it? And he said, well, he thought about it, but if I would go with him. And I thought, do you know, I don't even know this person. I think that's an awful cheek. So that put me off him, and I thought that was very bad-mannered and rude anyway. And
so how did he get back to Baramulla?
So anyway, so then when he heard, but I was not there, I don't know anything, he was staying in Needles also, but he heard from somebody that the first Indian troops were going in, and he wanted to go with them. So he went wherever he went to, the army place, and he was told that General Roy, I think, was going in, and he could go with them. So that's how he went into Baramulla. And they were up on that hill, and when these people first came in. But he had, before that, I think because of his work, he was in Srinagar. Then he bicycled there, to Baramulla. Then he came back for some reason. I didn't see very much of him. I tried to avoid him really because, well, you just didn't do those things in that way. My father would have killed me, I think.
But he travelled to Baramulla with a journalist called Sidney Smith.
No, Sidney Smith I don't know if he was travelled with him. I don't think he travelled with him. He met him there when they were up on this hill.
Did you meet Sidney Smith yourself?
No, never. But he told me the story of meeting this man, and when they escaped, eventually came down this hill when these people were overrunning that hill. And I think this general was already killed by then, I'm not sure. But they came rushing down that incline, and then there was a ditch. And John, of course, having been in Dunkirk and this, that, and the other, he said to Sidney Smith, get in here and let's even, try to hide or whatever. But of course they were seen there. And that was where the man came and took his jacket and his shoes and made him get on this motorcycle and drive into Baramulla.
That was a tribesman?
Mm. They came along, but they didn't understand any English. So John had to indicate, but they took his jacket immediately, whoever it was, and his shoes. And he was told, get on the motorcycle. This is what John related to me. What happened to Sidney Smith, I don't know. John tried to egg him on to come with him or do something or run this way or that way, but he wouldn't, as far as John told me. He wanted to do it his way, and he was right, I suppose. But anyway, that's how John came to. Then went with this man, drove the motorcycle. Then when they got near the convent, he jumped off and ran into the convent and escaped this man. And that's where he found what had happened to those people.
Was John going back to help your family?
Not my family in particular. He wanted to try and get all the women out of there, whoever was in that ward. There were 78 people in a ward. And there were Colonel Dykes and his wife were there. And so he thought he wanted someone to know what was happening and to get... He didn't actually go to do it himself. He wanted someone from either the Indian Army or Rawalpindi or whoever it was to send someone in and rescue these people. That was his main idea.
But was he doing this partly to impress you, do you think?
Oh, no. I don't think so. I didn't know anything about it. Well, my brothers were in the army, but I really didn't know about that. I think he just did it because he felt he wanted to, or I don't know.
But he managed to persuade the tribesmen to let the wounded, wounded, including your mother, go to...
That was after some few days. This was not the first lorry load of people, but they were sending out tribesmen who'd been injured in the fighting. And then someone told him there was a lorry leaving with tribesmen, wounded tribesmen. So he thought, this is a good idea, get my mother onto it, because she had been shot. And he would also get on. He was taken out several times, and, they searched him and questioned him and so on. But he just got back on. I don't know how he did that. And then he went into Rawalpindi and saw General Gracie and told him what was happening. Nobody really knew what was going on. And then he went from there. General Gracie arranged for him to go to Lahore. And from there he went to Delhi and told his story there. And that's how he came to rescue me.
In Jammu?
In Jammu. How? Well, he tried Jammu first. He didn't know I was there. He thought he just tried to find out, because he didn't know from where he was what was happening on the other side. This is from the Srinagar side. So when the plane came down in Jammu, he thought he'd just try to find out if anyone knew where I was. And he got this number for this house, and he called, and Winnie Shaw was the one who answered, and she said, yes, Leela's here with us.
Did you ever see any of the tribesmen?
Me, no, never. I was not there anywhere near them, because I was in Srinagar, Nidos, then I was at Foy Soni's house, and then we went out from the Banihal Pass side. Never saw them. But we saw the Indian troops.
What were they like? Were they Sikhs?
Well, that I can't tell you. I don't know, but we knew they were Indian troops, and we got up and cheered, and very happy. But then we were also concerned about getting away from them, because, we'd had the first vehicle we were in broke down, and the second one did, and then the third one we got into, and I don't know, we stayed in a dock bungalow somewhere, or a rest house. And the fourth day, I think, we were in a jeep, and then we got to Jammu.
A long journey.
It was, but and you never knew what was going to happen, or whether they were going to, who was going to pounce on you and capture you. Or it was a frightening sort of. I don't know if we actually realized the implication of how awful it was, but we knew that something terrible was happening, and couldn't understand how it could happen in Kashmir. Quiet, we were fairly, compared to the plains and Lahore and Rawalpindi, it was a quiet place.
What sort of place was Baramulla? You described that as a quiet place.
Oh, very.
But it had lots of restaurants and...
No, it did not. That's absolute nonsense. There were no restaurants.
Dabbas or
well,
eating
that
places?
might have been the bazaar area, but we didn't know anything about that. We didn't mix like that. We didn't know those people.
Did you mix with Pandits or with Sikh families?
Well, maybe there were one or two here and there, but we didn't really.
Did you have any Kashmiri Muslim friends?
Oh, I suppose there must have been, but we were all very young, and so we knew the O'Kellys and we knew their daughters, and we sort of, we very much were on our own, really.
And what did local people think about the nuns in the hospital?
Well, they liked them because they were very good to everybody. They cured them, they looked after them, they rode out on ponies, on horses to the villages. Everybody liked the nuns very much.
Did you know any of the nuns?
Oh, yes, I knew Sister Priscilla, mainly I knew the nuns in the dispensary, which was wrecked by the raiders. They smashed everything. But when I was there, I knew the Spanish nun, I forget her name, and Sister Priscilla was one of my favourites. She was the one who asked me for speckles.
When she meant spectacles?
And I used to go there and look round and see if no one was around and ask her to sing from opera to me. And she did.
In Italian?
She was a darling. I loved Sister Priscilla. Both those nuns, the Spanish nun and Sister Priscilla, I knew, but I didn't really get to know the other nuns because, that was a sort of cloistered place. You didn't sort of go in there.
Did you know Father Shanks?
Yes, and Father Mallet.
What were they like?
They were nice people, quite nice, but, I don't think my brother... Did you ever contact my brother in Calcutta What happened there?
He wrote me a couple of letters about his memories.
Well, he was with Father Shanks and Father Mallet, and he was on guard every night at the hospital, every single night. And they used to come, the tribesmen used to come and say, we want that girl and that girl sent out.
Did they misbehave with any women in the convent?
No, I don't think they did. They killed them, but they didn't, because my brother and Father Shanks and Father Mallet got together and decided what they were going to do about this request. And they never did do anything to send anyone out. They would not do that. So, my brother was there the whole time. Actually, of that period, he knows more than anybody else because he was there and he was on guard every night, guard duty.
Well, what sort of people were Father Shanks and Father Mallet? Were they friendly people, outgoing?
To a certain extent, but they sort of being priests, they were sort of withdrawn a bit. And I remember once there was a Dutch priest there, had a little goatee, but he painted beautifully, and I wanted him to give me painting lessons. And I told my parents that I'd asked Father, whatever his name was, Father de Reuter or something. And my father said no. I was not to do that. I was not going to be allowed to sit with a man like that, That was not done. No, you can't do that.
Did you get any sense of what politics was like in Baramulla? National conference, Muslim conference?
No, we never interfered. We never knew anything about that. We were never encouraged to know anything about that. We just knew a few people.
Did you know anything about Sheikh Abdullah?
Only what we read about or heard about, or knowing that he was this demonstration and that demonstration, and we knew that he had taken a leading role and wanted to have Kashmir for Pakistan, really.
Do you remember when Jinnah came to Baramulla?
No, that we never knew. We never even saw him.
Do you know the name Maqbul Sharwani?
No.
Or Muhammad Yusuf Sharaf?
We were never encouraged to know, and I think it's a shame, really. But we were never encouraged to know any of those things. We had to just be children in our own, or when I was also married, but we were not allowed to mix with people or, that sort of thing. The O'Kellys, yes. I think my parents weren't very pleased about John hanging around, and I was having a party with some friends of mine from Surinaga out in my garden, and the servants were serving drinks and so on. And who should turn up with John? And I was furious. I really could have killed him there and then. But anyway, he stuck there. He knew that one of the men there had wanted to marry me. I don't know.
In Baramulla?
Well, he was from Surinaga, but he was a Punjabi, and he had wanted to marry me. And John knew that. So John stayed there until everyone left. And I was furious. I said I didn't want to see him again. He was not to come to my house, please. And then Mrs. O'Kelly wrote to me and said he disappeared. Gone off into the mountains.
You were in demand, weren't you?
No.
Well, you've got 3 people after you.
Well, I don't know, but that was not in being in demand. It was just, I don't know. But anyway, his servant, who was a Pathan, but beautifully dressed always, and he loved John and, looked after his clothes for him and everything. He was crying. He went to Mrs. O'Kelly and said, my Saab is gone. And he's gone. He hasn't even taken a jacket. He's just gone in a shirt and trousers. And well, they wanted to know if John had taken anything else with him. No, he didn't know. He'd just gone up into the hills. So there was a search on. And Mrs. O'Kelly wrote to me and told me that there was search, and would I send my servants out to hunt for him. And I took that, I was furious. I thought, why am I being dragged into this? My father hears about it, I'm going to get into serious trouble. But anyway, in the end, Mrs. O'Kelly wrote to me, and in the evening and said that they had found him. Oh, no, one of my servants came back on horseback. And why had he come back? He'd found the sow, but he wanted water. And he didn't want water from anywhere else but from my place. And, that infuriated me to such an extent. I said, this man is not even civilized. He doesn't know what he's doing. So I said, well, if it's water you want to take, you can take that, but get out of here. I don't want to see you or anyone here. So the servant went off with the water. Next thing, Mrs. O'Kelly writes to me and says, John wants to see me. And I said, I'm sorry, I do not want to see this person. And that's that. But there was nothing that you could say to John. If he made up his mind, he was going to do it. And that was the evening when he saw me out with my friends in the garden, and he came along. And afterwards he stayed on until everyone left, and I thought that was very rude and bad-mannered, and I told him off. And I said, please don't come here anymore. Didn't make any difference to John. But then the next thing was that Mrs. O'Kelly wrote to me and said, we are leaving for Europe. My husband now, is a retired captain and so on, O'Kelly was. We are going, and we're going to sail back to England. So do you know where John can go and stay? And I wrote back and said, no, I have no idea. Well, why can't you give him one of your cottages? Then I wrote to Mrs. O'Kelly and said, I'm sorry, I have no cottages to get. I don't want anyone living near me.
So where did he move to?
So then he went to my sister. At that time, who had come? Somebody was with me. And he went to them, whoever it was, and said, I have to get a place to live in. And look at your sister, how mean she is. She won't even know, whoever it was, whether he spoke to one of my brothers or I don't know, I can't remember now. But he wanted a place to stay. So in the end, my family prevailed upon me to let him have one of the cottages in Balramala. But I said, well, he can be there. He's not to have any fruit from my garden. I'm not giving him any meals or anything. He's just, if he wants to rent that cottage, all right, but that's it. I don't like people living near me. So no food or anything. I didn't care where he was going to get his meals. I thought, well, he can make his own arrangements. I'm not in charge of him or have anything to do with him. But that was when the raid took place then, and he lost everything, all his kilt and everything went, as my things did.
Did you ever meet Colonel and Mrs. Dykes?
No, I saw them, but it was Colonel Dykes that my mother went to for when she was frightened and these people were running around in the hospital, that she went and knelt down by his chair where he was sitting in the room he had. He was sitting in a chair, and my mother, in her sheer fright, knelt down by him, just to get some sort of feeling that, there was somebody. And this man stood in the doorway, came along, one of the tribes, and just shot Colonel Dykes and shot my mother. Colonel Dykes died, but my mother didn't die, but she had all these wounds, in her thigh and this, that, and the other.
And when did your mother live until?
She survived that, but she was never the same. And then I made arrangements. Eventually, I went from Calcutta or from Jamshedpur. I rented a cottage up in Kalimpong because it was cooler there for my parents, and that's where I took them. Then started the trouble. No, none of us had any clothes or anything. So I had to get a shirt for this one, trousers for that one, and then my mother and father were there.
And when did your mother die?
She died about... I went to England with John, or to Scotland, and I wrote to my sister on this particular... I don't know which year it was, and I asked her to take over from me, to look after them, or just find out how they were while I was away. So when I came back from England, I went straight up to see them. They were in Kalimpong. And my mother was not well then, and then she died.
This is what, 1950s and 1960s?
It must have been in the 1960s.
And your father?
My father then died, I don't know how many years later. He used to come and stay with, when I was living in Delhi, John and I were, John's business was there. I used to bring him down every winter to be with us. And all the servants would line up and tell him, ask him what he'd like to eat for lunch and what he'd like for dinner. And my father needed all that, which he'd been used to from childhood, I guess. So the servants would all line up and look after him. And then I had some of my cousins in Delhi who used to come and take him out to play bridge. And then he went to, that has always been a sadness for me. Then John told me that we were leaving and going to Japan. And I had to take my father back to Kalimpong. And the winter was not over, and that made me very sad. But he was not happy going to anyone else. He just wanted to be with me. But I had to go with John, and so while I was away, then he died.
So that
he was with my brother.
That was after your mother?
Oh, that was after my mother, yeah.
And when did John die?
John died 9 years ago.
That would be 1994?
Yes, 94, in July the 11th.
And how old was he?
He was 84, I think. 84 or something.
And you're now 89?
I am 89.
You were born then in 1914?
14. Can't forget that. But anyway.
But you said that you saw Colonel and Mrs. Dykes?
Well, in passing, but I didn't know them.
Did you know Greta Barreto, the doctor?
Yes, I knew her.
What was she
I
like?
used to meet her. She was nice. I used to meet her in the dispensary sometimes. That's as far as I went. I didn't want to have anything to do with the convent. But I used to go to the dispensary to see my 2 nuns that I liked very much. And so I used to walk down from my house, which was not far from the convent. And I used to go into the dispensary and fool around with the nuns and these 2 nuns and talk to them and get Sister Priscilla to sing for me. And then I didn't really ever go into the convent proper.
You never went to the church?
No, never. Not being a Christian, I didn't, but I had been in every cathedral with John in England, everywhere where he used to sing and where he was a choir boy and this and that. But I didn't go to I went into the church, but I didn't go to any services or anything in Baramulla.
Is there anybody else you remember from the convent or the hospital? Mission?
Well, I met people, but all those names have become vague, but those 2 nuns always remain in my mind. I liked them very much. And then I thought the nuns were very hard-working. They preserved fruit, and we used to hope to, be able to buy some of those cans of, they bottled fruit and things for the winter.
You say they made wine?
And I believe they did, but I never tasted any of that. But I did buy the fruit, the bottled fruit. And those 2 nuns I didn't really have much to do with the other nuns. I knew the Reverend Mother, I'd met her.
What was she like?
It was quite nice. I think the nuns were nice people, much nicer than the nuns where I went to school.
What about the college? That had quite a good reputation, didn't it?
The boys were.
St. Joseph's College, yeah. Why didn't you send Inda there?
No, I didn't want to. I wanted Inda to go to the best school in India. So his name was down for the Doon School. And so he started in the preparatory school, which was run by Miss Oliphant. It broke my heart. I went there, and I went to the parlour, and then along came Miss Oliphant and took Inda away. I thought I was going to die. But anyway, I knew that my son had to be with other boys of his own age and not be with me, because Baramulla, there were, no children there that he could meet or mix with. But then school was good for him, because there he was going to have boys of his own age and get all his sports and things. And then he's always been very good at sports, and he was the best boxer of his time and the best this, that and the other at Welham. That was a priority school.
Are there any other figures that you remember from Baramulla? Do you remember the Wazir Wazarat, the Deputy Commissioner, or anybody of that sort?
No, the only people I ever met with when I went to the courts, I had a gardener who was marvellous with pruning trees. He was an old man, but he was wonderful. And of course, I was his ma-bop and every blessed thing. And he used to sleep outside my door and keep guard on me. And so he was a wonderful old man. But at pruning, he was an absolute expert, wonderful. He used to prune all my trees if they needed pruning, and grafting or whatever. He did a lot of grafting too. But he was the one who turned against us in the end, or me. He brought a case against me, or his son did, and said that they demanded some of the land. I had property there in Baramulla, which I'm supposed to still have. And then he demanded some of that, and I think his sons put him up to it, or someone. So after that I never saw him, because I only went back to Baramulla twice. Once with General Tamaya and once with John.
When did you go back with General Tamaya?
I don't remember the year, but it was when these people had been driven out and the Indian Army were there, and he was the Commander-in-Chief of the whole of the Indian Army.
So was it later in 47 or the next year?
It was well, this raid took place in 47, and it was I think about a year or two after, because then the 19th Div had taken over my place, and that's where they had their headquarters. And I went down with Timmy, and we had lunch there. And Timmy kept looking at me and saying, "Leela, shall I bring a bucket now? Are you going to fall in, start crying?" And I said, "No, I'm not, and I don't want any buckets or anything of yours."
Is Timmy General Timaya?
And he and I were invited to lunch by the 19th Div, whoever was there, the general or colonel or whoever.
Did you go to the convent on that trip?
I can't remember if I did, but I know that I went to my lawyer, Mr. Garyali, but that was not on that trip with General Tamar. It was when I went with John, and then I found that table of mine.
It's a beautiful table.
I know, but I had to have it done up. The drawer was missing. It was full of ink, and he had a cloth over it. And John and I were invited by my lawyer, Mr. Garyali, for lunch. While we were there, we had driven down from Srinagar, where we were staying at Nido's. And so he invited us to lunch, which we accepted, and we were sitting there having lunch, and I happened to just look down. I saw the feet, the legs of this table. I thought, that looks very familiar, and how does he have anything like that in his home? He was not that type of person who'd have that kind of furniture. So I just said, "Mr. Garyali, I think that table belongs to me. Would you take the tablecloth off and let me see?" And it was. No drawer, full of ink.
So he had got property which had been looted from your home?
Oh, he must have. I don't know what anyone took, where it went. I was not there. None of us were there. They just came like a lot of locusts and took everything.
What did you hear about the killing and the molesting of people in Baramulla?
Well, that's where they made their mistake. If they had not stopped in Baramulla to do any of this, or to loot or whatever, They'd have been in near Srinagar much earlier than they were. They stopped to, enjoy themselves in the bazaars and so on. And that was really their undoing because they were delayed, giving the Indian Army time to get in.
Did you know any of the women who were attacked?
No, I had, I don't know, I'd probably seen them or something, but I really never went to the convent much. I just used to go to see these two nuns in the dispensary.
But the local women who were attacked, did you know any of them? Did you hear from, did you speak to them, any of them afterwards?
No, because I never went to Baramulla to stay. I just went there, drove down to Baramulla, rented a car. Well, I went with General Tamar, so he had the army thing, but when I went with John, we rented a car. And we just went there to see Mr. Gauriali and have lunch with him and find out what was going on about the property and, just to get a general idea. Because at that time, I don't know whether John and I ever thought we were going back to Kashmir, but it was my property. But then, of course, I soon realized that the army were never going to, because they told me they would not give it up. Where did I expect? Madam, do you expect us to go into tents, to go out into the woods? And I said, yes, I couldn't care less. This is my property and I want you to get out of it. How do you know that I don't want to come here back tomorrow? It's my property. Didn't make any difference.
Do you remember the cinema in Baramulla?
The?
Cinema.
No, we never went there. We were sort of, we just kept to ourselves, really, because there were not people there that you mixed with. They weren't, well, there were one or two families. We knew the Kellys, and I think my parents knew one or two of the Indian families. There were some people by our same name who lived almost next door, the Pasrichas. But one day I went with my mother to see Mrs. Pasricha, just to... as a call, those days of a calling and there's cards and things left. And sitting out in her garden, she was one of those semi-educated Indians that, anyway, she said, I heard her saying to my mother, it's going to be very difficult for your daughters to get married, to get them married. And of course, I heard this sort of in passing, talking to my mother. And it was something about, because we had an English mother and I had an Indian father and this, that, and the usual prejudices and things. And she was one of those semi-educated Indians, which I loathe. They always seem to know the best, everything about everything. Not only that, it's not that, they're really so biased about people. They frowned about, I think they frowned about my parents because my mother was English and father was Indian. And he came from a very, very well-known and good family, my father did.
But because you had mixed religions and mixed races, they thought that nobody would want to marry you?
Mm. Religion didn't come into it so much as a mixed marriage was frowned upon. They didn't think it was, why did this person have to go there to get somebody when we had all the girls here in India? That sort of thing. That's why, with all that going on, I was put off. First of all, in the convent, I was put off religion, and then hearing all this, I thought, oh God, these people are so, stuck in their ways. They have no flexibility at all. And I was just wanting to get away from that. I think I was probably the only one in the family who really, really wanted to get out.
Where did you want to go?
To England. I thought, well, that I didn't ever think about America until my son came here. And then we were in Beirut when he called us and said, why don't you come? And so that's how we came. But anyway, shall we end this now?